Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us here at ltveh.org. Just click on the videos. You can find us on Cablevision, Channel 20, on all of Long Island except East Hampton and East. I am on Thursdays at 3 o'clock. So tune in because you'll find some very interesting information about authors. We have a Facebook page also called The Writer's Dream, and if you wish to be on the show, you can message me through Facebook. So we're on YouTube. Just look for my name, Linda Maria Frank. If you look for Linda Frank, you'll get other people. But use my middle name, and we have about 200 authors. So if you're interested in getting into writing or finding out about authors and what they do and how they do it, especially local authors, please do look at the YouTube channel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest, Dr. Dennis Carey. He is a pediatric endocrinologist, and he has also written Silver Strand, the Long Beach Saga. This is historical fiction from 1837 to 2012, from the shipwreck of the Mexico to Superstorm Sandy. So, welcome, Dennis. That's quite a jump from pediatric endocrinology to Long Beach. How'd you get there?
How did I get there? Well, I've always been interested in doing some writing back from the time I was a young child, but mainly I love to read. I was an avid reader. I know you've mentioned how Nancy Drew books influenced you, and the Hardy Boys did the same thing for me. And I must admit, I did read some of my sister's Nancy Drew books as well. And so, I've always been interested in reading and also been interested in history. I had a very my Mr. Chips was my history teacher in high school, and I loved history, and so I've always read history, and I probably more as an adult I became interested in historical fiction, and that's the genre that I wrote my book in.
Well, that's how I felt in school. My favorite subject was history, geography, the social studies. But I had to know how everything worked, so I ended up in science. Because
I ended up in science as well,
Yeah,
so it's sort of an interesting comparison.
You did. So I'm going to read a little excerpt here from the book, or from one of your reviews. Bridget O'Herlihy is about to freeze to death on the deck of the shipwrecked Mexico, 200 yards from the shining silver sands of a barrier beach 3,000 miles from Ireland. Is it her feeble prayers, her plucky resourcefulness, or the mystical power of the relic she holds that delivers her from a certain doom? Silver Strand, the Long Beach Saga, is a work of historical fiction telling the story of a beautiful island off the coast of Long Island. The book traces the history of Long Beach from the 1837 shipwreck through Superstorm Sandy, which I already said, and paralleled by the mystery of the lost staff of St. Patrick via Tales of. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to read the topics because I think everybody's going to be interested in this. The Long Beach Railroad's Gilded Age. And of course, we have the Gilded Age on TV now, so this is definitely going to be a plus for your book. The 1880 Long Beach Hotel. The birth of a beach resort for the moneyed set by William H. Reynolds in 1907. Irene and Vernon Castle's Tango Mania on the boardwalk in the 1910s. Bootlegging and rum running during the Roaring '20s. Growth to a village in a city. Navy town during World War II. Ocean playground without. And I'm going to add one to it. You have a very good ice skating ring. I learned to figure skate there. So Long Beach has a lot of stuff, and just so many interesting things that happen there. Yeah, and I feel that Long Island has an incredible history. Not just Long Beach, but there are so many places on Long Island, starting with Brooklyn, that have just, and going out to Montauk, such an interesting history. I travel, and when I travel, they ask me, "Where are you from?" I say, "Long Island," and they make fun of it. It makes me crazy. Anyway, uh, so tell us about how you wrote this book. What was the research like?
Well, my family has lived in Long Beach for over 100 years. My mother came there when she was 4 years old. So we, you know, we, I knew Long Beach existed from the early 1920s, but when I found out that there was a hotel that was built by the Long Island Railroad in 1880 and that it burned down in spectacular and mysterious fashion, perhaps in 1907, that I said, why did it burn down? And more, 15 or more years ago, before Hurricane Superstorm Sandy, I found some notes that I wrote down, murder at the Long Beach Hotel. And I never went much beyond a couple of pages. But after Sandy, when there was so much publicity about Long Beach, I said, I really should have written that book. And 10 years later, I finished that book
Yeah.
on April Fool's Day, 2022. And it was just in time for the 100th anniversary of the incorporation of Long Beach as a city. But setting the stage, I had this map behind me, and I'm just going to point to it just briefly.
Sure.
And over here, if you can see the dark blue, anywhere there's dark blue, that is the waterways, that is the ocean on the bottom, and the bays or the channel at the top. The brown is the many dunes or hassocks or land that constituted Long Beach in the 1880s, so to speak. There were 4 or 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 islands that became Long Beach. It all changed over time, shoaling and whatnot. And the green is the what used to be water. And this is all filled in after 1907 to make a landmass that went along this red line at the bottom and this line over here at the top. So sand dunes were knocked down, put into the water, marshes were filled in, and the water land was dredged and made into what became Long Beach. I'll just point out 2 other things before I leave the map. One is that there's this whole Back Bay area, okay, in the green and the blue back in time. And over here, right in the center of the main mass, is what was the Long Beach Hotel. So the Long Beach Hotel was built by the Long Island Railroad, hopefully to make money, and they were catering to the rich and famous, the people who would come there. This was the post-Civil War nouveau riche people from New York City and the greater area, and were they were going to, Newport and Rhode Island, but here was someplace close to home. And the Long Island Railroad built this fantastic hotel that was 900 feet long, 25% as wide. It was beautiful with redwood shingles and verandas and gables, and the people came, and it was a big hit for 27 years.
Is that how the Long Island Railroad has a branch that goes to Long Beach? Did they build a
That's
railroad then?
That's exactly. In fact, if you look at this map, the railroad,
I
that's
see.
exactly the route of the railroad is today. It's with the one exception, it went right down to the shore, to the beach.
Mhm.
Okay, nowadays it's on the bay
Right.
side of town, practically. So, so I had this idea about writing a history of Long Beach, and it was sort of just an idea. And then I said, I'm going to map out the various time periods, the eras of Long Beach that were interesting to me, some of which you mentioned in that snippet. And so I had that set, and I knew it would be longitudinal, and I set to work on that. Now, right at the outset, I found out that local newspaper man, Paul Jackson, had written a book about Long Beach. And I went, oh, I kind of got a little bit down. But the title of that book is Scoundrels by the Sea, the sullied past of Long Beach's politicians, swindlers, and bootleggers, and worse. And I guess the worst would be murdered. There were a couple of murders in Long Beach over over the years, and so that was all pretty negative. It was a great piece of work. I love reading it myself, but it was sort of hard facts, a lot of data, and that's when I said, you know what, I'm going to write a novel. And I'm going
Hmm.
to make it positive because there's so much positive about Long Beach. Now, it's not that I didn't have a murder and I didn't have some occult and some weird stuff going on in my book to make it interesting. I said boat, but that's what Long Beach is. It's a boat in the middle of the ocean, and all around it, it's a great playground. And I know you've mentioned this before. Growing up on Long Island, we have the boating, we have the fishing, we have the surfing, we have clamming, eeling, lobstering. It's all there, and so the story of Long Beach isn't that different from the rest of Long Island, whether it is from Brooklyn, where there were oyster beds back in the day that were
Right.
safe, and all the way out to Montauk, where there was, even where I live part-time now, is Cold Spring Harbor was a whaling town. And so
And they
all
have a
these,
great whaling museum.
yes, absolutely. And so that was how I got to the idea of writing a novel. And so, I working and taking 10 years to write the book actually gave me some advantage as far as this book was concerned,
Mhm.
because I came up with ideas as I was going along. I started out at the beginning. And when I read some stuff, you know, the shipwreck is the beginning of the book in one way, and I'll come back to that. But as I read, there were people who came to Long Beach, or what became Long Beach before that, and that was the Native Americans, the indigenous people. And
Sure.
so I started out writing about two preteen Algonquin children who sneak off to the barrier island. And it was originally my first chapter called A Day at the Beach. And everything that people would do at the beach in modern times, roughly, they did. They went swimming, they watched the porpoises race along and almost go surfing and body surfing. They clammed, they collected shells. And so um, and I had some medical things in that, and I'll get into that perhaps a little bit later. But I I found that I wasn't sure that was a good place to start the book, and then I got the idea about the shipwreck. And the shipwreck occurred in 1837. Um, there's been books written about the shipwreck of that and the Bristol, which wrecked a couple of months before Rockaway. Arthur Matson of Rockville Center has written extensively about that.
Mhm.
Um, and, the more I looked into the wreck of the Mexico, the more I thought that was a focal point to start. And then I had the eureka moment where I decided to have a fictional survivor of the Mexico.
Mine's a
And
ghost. I have a fictional survivor too, but she's a ghost.
yeah, well, I do have a ghost I do have
Oh,
a
good.
phantom in my book, and so that's a lot of fun to work with as well. So I have this mystery of why this young Colleen, 19 years old or so, is somehow coming to America entrusted with the law staff of St. Patrick, which I garnered from one of my favorite authors, Edward Rutherford, in his Dublin saga, which is about the princes and the rebels of Ireland. And I said, this Colleen, I can weave this through the rest of the book as sort of a hook to connect the various time periods. And I have basically her survival in the marshes of Long Beach, on the bay side. And she meets up with a part Algonquin, part white Bayman, and how they coexist together is sort of the beginning of the book, where she has quite a plight that she is now she's actually murdered somebody in order for her to survive,
Ooh.
and she can't just go waltzing into Manhattan, and because she doesn't even know who she's meeting. They were supposed to meet her when the ship docked. So there's this whole mystery of what's going on. So I developed the story on the Bay as one of the major settings. Nancy Solomon is a founder of Long Island Traditions and the first president. Nancy wrote a book about the bay houses along the South Shore, all the way in Long Island, many of whom are still there, at least for the time being. And she came to one of my talks and she said, you were spot on. You hit that so right. I said, how did you do that? I said, well, I read your book. And she said, no, that's not possible. You have it better than me. And I said, that can't be. But that was a nice moment. So there's that part of the book which lays the groundwork for what Long Beach was in sort of ancient times.
So let me ask you a question. Does her descendants move along in time, or is
exactly? Her descendants move along in time, and so there's the mystery is associated with her family, and I don't make it obvious most of the time. I drop some hints here and there about how that might be involved. There was also another character on the marsh, and it was this man named Perry Pat Smallins. Now, Perry Pat Smallins, I mentioned, was a character I wrote about in English 101 back in college, and I resurrected him for 50, 60 years later. And so the Finch family is the good guys, and then I have the Amos and Barnaby and Cyrus, I'm blocking on the last name at the moment, are the bad guys. And so they're partly involved in trying to get to this staff and acting in various nefarious ways throughout the book.
All right. So what was your favorite segment of the book? Which period did you like best, or which one was the most surprising? Or
well, I love the Gilded Age. I love the Gilded Age. I read at least 2 Edith Wharton novels, The Age of Innocence and The House of Mirth, and loved them. And I really got into them. That took a whole year. That took a year practically and going back and reading and getting the feeling of that time period. The main character, female character in that session is a woman I call Phoebe Percival von Maelstrom, and she's old money, Knickerbocker money, and she and her grandmother and her half-sister come to the Long Beach Hotel. And she is due to be married to somebody who is from that same thing, but she does just about fall for a fellow of lower socioeconomic, and I liked that whole part of the Gilded Age, and I have been watching the Gilded Age on TV. In 1882, Oscar Wilde came to Long Beach, so of course I bring him into the book, and I have a lot of that, and I have Phoebe writing letters to Paris to her friend Edith, who is to me Edith Wharton, people should figure out, describing, I have what's going on a day, and then at night she kind of recaps other part of that time period. So that time period was a lot of fun.
Which time period do you think showed the most change in Long Beach?
The most change. Well, the most change came in 1907 when William H. Reynolds, the first mayor of the village and the town. He was a young estate senator in New York at one time, a builder, an entrepreneur, an impresario. And he basically took that tabula rasa, that blank page on this map, and put it into a grid and built these magnificent homes. In fact, in the last week, the first house that he built on the bay was knocked down and destroyed, which was such a shame. Nobody was able to, keep it. So there it became a real place, a real city. And he built the boardwalk, and the boardwalk is the connector. If you want to talk about a setting, and I do spend a lot of time talking about the boardwalk and this book.
It's famous.
as it evolves, and even getting up to the time when I was a child, and there were rides there and arcades and games that you could play. And
Mhm.
I do drag Billy Crystal, who is a age mate of mine.
Why not?
I was not knowing him personally, but into the book.
So there's quite a bit of French and Yiddish in the book. How did that get in there?
I didn't hear that fully.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's you have a question here for me. It says there's a bit of French and Yiddish in the book. Did you study French and
Well,
why?
I lived in Montreal in the late 1980s. We lived there for a year, and I learned a little bit of French. So the people in the Gilded Age were very much francophones, and the women would go to Paris to the House of Work to get their $10,000 gowns for the Mrs. Astor's balls going
Hmm.
going forward. And growing up in Long Beach and going to a medical school that essentially was Jewish.
Yes.
I learned a lot of Yiddish. In fact, I probably know more Yiddish than some of my Jewish colleagues.
Actually think that if you live in this area and you don't know any Yiddish words, you've been living in the basement
Yeah,
because
and so many of the
it's so
words are
much a
just,
part of our slang here.
yeah, part of the words are just so perfect.
Yeah. So what was the most challenging part of publishing?
Well, the most challenging part was finding a publisher. Um, I I I thought I had an in with a publisher, and he was very respectful and told me I was good writing, but it wasn't the type of thing he published. So I stepped back from that first rejection, and I said, "Do I really want to keep putting out queries?" And then it hit me that although my book any New Yorker, anybody on Long Island could enjoy my book, and even beyond that. But it was really written for people who know Long Beach, who live there, been there, visit there, or want to visit it. So that's when I just made that decision that I was going to self-publish it, and I got into that. I basically did the cover. I did all of that, and that I did in the 6 months after I retired in order to get the book out in time for the centennial of Long Beach in 2022, which was good. It was a good hook. I mean, I got some publicity both on the media, the TV media and the written media. The fact that it was the centennial was newsworthy, and so I sold a lot of books right out of the gate with that.
What are you doing now to market?
It's basically summertime fairs. Long Beach has a lot of fairs, arts and
Yeah.
craft fairs, and I go there and I meet new people, I meet new friends, I meet old friends, and I just love when people come back and say they enjoyed the book. I haven't had many Rotten Tomatoes thrown at me. One of my
Oh,
best
good.
one of
I'm
my
glad.
best experiences was I was up on the boardwalk 6 weeks after I published. And I was looking out to sea, checking the surf, and somebody came up to me from the side and said, "Are you looking for Calico Jack?" Who is the Bay Man that I talked about. And so that was quite a treat to know I had hit that note with somebody.
Well, I always ask this question. What was the funniest thing that happened to you in this whole experience that took 10 years?
The funniest thing, well, I think that was one of the funniest, having somebody come
Oh,
come up
okay.
to me and say, "Are you looking for Calico Jack?"
All right. So, do you have another book planned?
I do, and it's quite different. It's actually going to be a travelogue. My wife and I, after I finish my residency, instead of getting a job, we retrofitted a Volkswagen van that was orange and white. We called it the Creamsicle Express, and we took off for 6 months and traveled 20 plus thousand miles visiting the Nash. My boss, who at the time everybody was getting jobs, said, "And Dr. Carey's going to do a national park fellowship." And and that happened because I had put off a year doing a fellowship in pediatric endocrinology.
Okay. So the book is going to be based on the
It's going to be based on the
Volkswagen.
trip. Basically, I kept a diary very nicely, an oral diary on a tape recorder. And the last two years approximately, I've been putting that together with a lot of anecdotes, a lot of funny stories. And I got into photography, so I may certainly the ebook will have all the photographs, a lot of photographs in it, and quite a lot of natural wonders, and New Orleans and San Francisco.
Yeah, it's a fun country to visit, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, advice. Time for advice.
Advice. The advice I would give to anybody who's a writer and interested in writing is write. Just put pen to paper or the computer if you so like, and start doing it. Reading, to me, reading is what I learned to write from, reading other people. And, it's really hard to copy other people in particular, but, find a style you like and then add your own nuance to that style. I really think I mentioned historical fiction, but Edward Rutherford has written all these great tomes about, Russia and England and Paris and Ireland, and New York for that matter. I got a feeling of how he went from the fictional to the reality and back and forth. And when I first started doing some writing, I did some writing about my family history, which I never published. And when I first started writing that book, I said I hit it. I found that I had a rhythm that I could write in, and I carried that over to Silver Strand, and I think I'm doing it again.
Okay, so Dennis, it was a pleasure to have you. If you would like to come back and talk about the rest of the book, because the book is so full of tales, and you're such a good talker about it, speaker about it, that if you want to do a second one, let me know.
Yeah,
But
by
thanks
all
so much.
means, there is. It's a long book. There are a lot of
I know.
stories, and I only got to the beginning.
And it is Long Island, and Long Island is so full of history.
Absolutely, I agree.
So be well, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good holiday and
Oh,
coming up.
yes. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye now. Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.